Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings. Joined today, I generally refer to him as my good friend, Theo Gremminger, but he just smashed me in the FFT Dynasty League, so we're only kind of friends right now. Theo, thank you so much for being here. I always say this in season. I know what a grind it is this time of year, and so making time to come onto my show, and I know particularly for you, who record like 17 podcasts a week, remind everybody where they can find you.
Yes, you can find me over at Fantasy Points. Shout out to my co-host of School of Scott Barrett. We record later today. So sort of how the sausage is made here, Heath. I'm actually podcasting with our friend Jax Falcone, Scott Bollinger, a little bit later today. So this actually worked out really well, the timing of it. So always enjoy coming on here, talking ball with you. And yeah, big shout out to Justin Fields, who showed up in our matchup this past week. So my team's not exactly doing great in that league either, but it was nice to get a win.
Well, I actually want to take just a quick second to talk about the FFT Dynasty League because I think it can be instructive. I have fallen to 3-5 in year one of that league, and I believe we both have the same record.
Yeah,
and this is the point where people are thinking, okay. We just saw in that same league a 4-4 team dealt Jonathan Taylor away. Went for Travion Henderson, a first and a second, which I thought was a pretty good haul. And Tim is a very good dynasty player, so I'm sure looking at his team, he's making the right decision. But when you're in that 3-5 to 4-4 range, I think 2-6, you probably know the writings on the wall. I think it's really important to how did you get here? And look at your remaining schedule, especially in Dynasty. Every Dynasty league I'm in, by this point, there's 3 teams that aren't trying to score any points. If you haven't played any of those 3 teams left and you're sitting at 3-5, it's much different than if you're 3-5 and your 3 wins are against those 3 teams. So check out the schedule. And I'm just going to ask you, since you just destroyed me, to let me know if I'm making the wrong decision. I'm looking at my team, and I think 4 of my games left are against teams that are below me in the standings right now in that league. And when you destroyed me last week, I had Kyron Williams, Ken Walker, Brock Bowers, Puka Nacua, not Ken Walker, Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, Brock Bowers, and Kyler Murray all on the bench. Should I hold on for a couple more weeks, Theo, or should I do some old guys? I've got Kamara, I've got Montgomery. Should I start looking to deal these vets?
Yeah, I was looking at your roster, and really the only surefire sell is Kamara.
Yeah.
Montgomery's sort of on that line where he could have another year of viability. I mean, what's going to change with Montgomery's situation next season? Do we anticipate that Detroit is going to move off of him? Maybe it's going to be slightly more Jahmyr Gibbs, but as long as Dan Campbell is running the show there, it seems like you're going to have at least some utility out of Montgomery. So he's sort of a guy that no one's going to really pay up for. So it's whether you're rebuilding or whether if you're in a long-term rebuild, I understand selling them. But if you're sort of tweaking things, trying to maybe improve your draft capital and then go for it next year, I think he's sort of right on that line of you can keep him. I think a lot of times fantasy managers might make the mistake of just selling a guy like David Montgomery just to sell him. Kamara's a surefire sell. Kamara's well past the age apex. This is going to be a quarterback change potentially in New Orleans this week. The team's headed absolutely nowhere. The one silver lining for holding Kamara would be Heath just wait a few days just in case they do move him at the trade deadline, which does not look like it's going to happen.
Doesn't sound like he wants to do that.
Doesn't sound like he wants to do it. And I feel like they're sort of like Tennessee was with Derrick Henry. They're just going to hold him until the bitter end. And Alvin Kamara, I think there's a lot of people in that building who want him to, for better or worse, retire as a Saint. So I feel like your team is kind of stuck in neutral, and Kamara would really be the only one to sell. But again, wait 1 week just in case.
Well, we need this team to get out of neutral, Theo. And we were talking before the show. There's a lot of people, and I have 3 teams, 1 dynasty, 2 redraft with both Puka and Bowers.
Yeah.
Those are teams that are not currently looking like one of the best teams in the league, obviously. We're hoping that's going to start changing this week, right? We're hoping that these injured guys are coming back and they're going to produce like we expected them to produce earlier in the year.
Yeah, it's super tilting for fantasy managers this week where we're anticipating Puka Nacua returning. Brock Bowers, it's sort of a lot of sort of lack of clarity with him. I'll throw Bucky Irving, despite it being a bye week. Heath, Bucky Irving is one where I think fantasy managers are tilting a little bit. Sort of a lack of clarity with Bucky Irving when he's going to come back. There was pictures leaked on social media, not even leaked really. It's him sort of wearing like a shoulder harness. He's got the shoulder injury. He's got the foot injury. That one is very, very tilting. And then, of course, Lamar Jackson, where we thought we were going to have him back last week, and big kind of rug pulled out from under us moment. And now it looks like Lamar Jackson will, in fact, return this week. So Puka is about as tilting as it gets. He was looking like a league winner. And the Bowers teams in your leagues, they might be struggling, but Puka teams were absolutely rolling. So missing him for an extended period of time would be catastrophic. Really, I think Puka's the one that we're circling in ink. We really want to see him come back. The wide receiver position right now, Jamar Chase is really sort of running away with it when it looks like the back-to-back potential wide receiver 1 overall. Jackson Smith and Jigba, who we've been both very, very high on, Heath, over the years, we're looking pretty sharp on that one. He looks awesome. But Puka Nacua coming back and playing like he did in the early portion of the season would sort of maybe at least put a challenge up there for what Chase has been able to accomplish the last few weeks.
Absolutely. You know, the chat knows what's coming. Theo, we're talking about, I said it, I think in the chat, I said it in the notes, maybe, definitely the greatest rookie tight end class ever. And yes, Harold Fannin, we're talking about him after the break as well. But I had a couple of questions not related to the rookie tight ends I wanted to get to Theo before our first break. Cam Skattebo, awful injury, hoping for a full recovery, but kind of a weird spot for dynasty managers because you drafted this guy in round 2 of your rookie draft, 23-year-old running back, and he was just remarkable. It looks like you, for a couple of weeks, you landed a top 12 running back, not to mention extremely fun to watch. And now he's gone for the year. And it's, I think, likely we've got a new regime in New York next year. And he's a day 3 running back. Is he a buy for rebuilders? This is, we talk about rebuilding teams like trade for hurt players because their value gets depressed and you don't need them at all this year. Skattebo seems like one of those guys. Like, would you give up a 2026 second for him now? Is he somebody that you would look to acquire if you're playing for next year?
I think a 2026 second is a price I'd be willing to give up for Skattebo. The problem is I think that a lot of Skattebo managers are going to be selling him for more than that because of just how efficient he was. Mm-hmm. And also just the fact that he's remarkably likable player who was sort of trending towards not only being a fantasy asset, but sort of an NFL star, almost like a cult hero at this point from Arizona State onto what he's been able to do for the Giants. So I don't know if he's lost enough value in terms of trade equity that he would be somebody that I'm actively looking to buy. I'm seeing him being put up for sale in a lot of dynasty leagues now, Heath, because the problem with Skattebo, I know for me, is I had him in a few dynasty leagues. I have a couple of big FFPC leagues where I had Skattebo, and those teams are like in first and second place because Skattebo was in my RB2 or my flex spot. And on top of some strong running back play with those teams, I think I'm kind of forced to sell because I'm staring at the potential to make some money to win a championship, and trading Skattebo for players with 2025 utility where I could get 80% of the production that he was going to give me for the rest of the year, even if it means taking on an older asset. That's something at least I'm strongly considering. But yeah, I think if you're able to trade just a second round pick for him, I think it's worth the risk because we've seen a lot of these day 3 guys just completely go to zero. With Skattebo, I think his game translates towards holding value, provided he's going to recover from injury. And there haven't been a whole lot of these kind of Twitter docs insinuating that this is going to be an injury that's going to be incredibly difficult for him to come back from. I think it's more of a time period you have to wait for rather than a ramp up when he does come back. Skattebo, what he has is two-way ability. And when we're taking on players that are injured, we love taking on ones that can actually catch the football. And Scadaboo's shown that he can do that. I mean, he had a receiving touchdown the game that he got injured this past week against Philly. So Scadaboo's got the two-way ability, and he was a day 3 guy, but he was an early 4th round pick. And because of the quality of the running back position in this 2025 draft class, early 4th round pick, I mean, we're kind of splitting hairs here, Heath. Would we say he was a way more valuable player if he was picked 15 spots earlier and went at the end of round 3? I know sort of profile-wise, he would have counted as a day 2 guy, but at least he was an early 4th round pick. So, yeah, I think I'm sort of pretty neutral on Scadaboo, but if the price is right, I don't mind taking him on as an asset. And just as a bird's eye view, an injured Cam Scadaboo would still be probably a top 5 back in the upcoming 2026 running back class, not to get too far ahead of things. Jeremiah Love, of course, well ahead of Scadaboo for me, as he should be for everyone. But when we go down the list, it's not like there's a ton of Teflon running back prospects that are sort of jumping out at us. I think it's going to end up being pretty wide receiver heavy for our dynasty rookie draft first rounds, at least at this point.
I really rapid fire. So just be yes or no. You have Cam Scadaboo. I know you do. 6-2 team. You're trying to win money this year. These I'll just choose backs who are 26 or older. These backs get offered to you straight up for Scadaboo. Travis Etienne. Yes or no?
I think I'm going to say no on that one.
J.K. Dobbins.
J.K. Dobbins plus maybe, Keith. You could twist my arm on that. J.K. Dobbins in a pick. I think I might be doing that.
Red hot DeAndre Swift.
I'm going to say no on that one.
Derrick Henry.
Yes, I'm going Derrick Henry.
That's probably it. Not David Montgomery or Alvin Kamara, right?
No, neither of those. I think that the Derrick Henry one is probably a good target for you. The past 2 weeks he's been very productive with Lamar Jackson coming back. I mean, you could paint a scenario that Derrick Henry's giving us low-end RB1 production for the rest of the season, and his numbers would look pretty similar to what we would have gotten from Cam Scadaboo. And again, with Derrick Henry, I don't think he's going to go to 0 next year either. I think he's coming back to Baltimore next year and will be at least a strong player in a committee. Older, but similar bet to David Montgomery with potential higher ceiling.
I think the problem with Henry more than the other guys is you're much less likely to find Henry on a team that ended up being bad. If a team had a good chance of being bad, they were probably already traded away to a team that was planning on those other guys have kind of emerged a little bit and been a little better than we expected maybe. And so they might be on a team and they're a little younger, so they might not have been dealt. Another question here from the opposite direction. Is George Kittle a good buy for contenders? He's played basically 2 games and a quarter, and he hasn't looked like George Kittle yet. And he's 32 years old, and he's already had a pretty significant hamstring this year. Is this the type? I saw him traded in one of my dynasty leagues today, and a massive deal of kind of guys that were worth seconds, and somebody was able to get a first and a second for 4 of them. Is George Kittle somebody contenders should be buying? Is he getting ready to turn back into George Kittle?
Yeah, I think when it comes to George Kittle, you also have the out where if you buy him as a contender, a lot of times contending rosters enter the next season and they stay contenders, Heath. Mm-hmm. And with George Kittle, I think possibly the slow coming back and not quite looking like George Kittle, maybe he's still a little bit banged up would be my thought. But he does have contract insulation. He had the big contract extension last year. So George Kittle coming into the 2026 season is going to be not quite as highly drafted in redraft as he was this year, but it's not like he's going to drop considerably. I don't think this is going to be some massive drop. You also have Brock Purdy coming back, potentially in a couple of games or soonish. And I think you could also see a bump up for Kittle. So yeah, I'm fine trading for George Kittle. I think the thesis with Kittle is that he's going to have a strong second half of the year. We also like San Francisco's playoff schedule. That was one of the reasons we were so enthusiastically drafting guys like Ricky Pearsall, George Kittle, Brock Purdy. Everything looked good towards the end of the year. So that thesis sort of still exists. I think Kittle's fine. And like you said, you're going to get a discount based on where you would have had to pay for him 6 weeks ago. So
for sure.
I don't mind taking on a little bit of George Kittle if the price is right.
This one, probably 2 of the guys that I've been most wrong about at the quarterback position this year. Jaden Daniels, mostly because he can't stay healthy, Drake May because maybe he's just the number one quarterback in Dynasty in a couple of weeks. Jaden Daniels or Drake May in Dynasty?
Drake May. I think we've got a larger sample size now. We've seen last year, Jaden Daniels, everything ran pure. I would say that things are trending down in Washington. They're very old at the skill positions, and also Laramie Tunsil left last game with an injury. Like you said, Jaden Daniels banged up multiple times this year, whereas Drake May, everything seems to be slowing down for him. We've had back-to-back weeks with 50-plus rushing yards for Drake May. Heath, it's funny. Drake May's giving us like top 3 scoring numbers at the quarterback position, but it doesn't feel like we've seen a ceiling game from him yet. And it doesn't feel like we're seeing the Patriots being tested on a weekly basis.
Right.
They've been rolling people recently. So I do think we're going to see some massive, massive scoring weeks from Drake May over the second half of the year. I think Drake May is going to continue to be sort of an interesting dark horse MVP candidate. And I think that the dynasty price for him is going to continue to get more and more expensive. New England also is going to continue adding skill position players in the offseason. When you look at what Drake May has been able to do this year, he's been doing it with Hunter Henry at tight end, an older Stephon Diggs at wide receiver, Kayshon Boutte at wide receiver, and then running back wise, about as much as they could have gotten out of Ramondre Stevenson. And then the one player that we had anticipated was going to be the offensive skill position focal point, Travion Henderson, had a strong week 8 as a runner, but has offered us next to nothing as a receiver. So Drake May, the skill position players around him are only going to get better and better. And the draft capital between the two of them, Heath, is almost identical. I mean, we're sort of splitting hairs here on May versus Daniels. So yeah, I think it's Drake May for me. When I do my dynasty rankings update at Fantasy Points, he's going to move ahead of Daniels. And like you said, him challenging for the QB1 overall in dynasty, not sure I'm there yet. I still think that, Lamar Jackson is pretty good. Josh Allen's pretty good. But Drake May should be considered right in that elite asset tier. And Jaden Daniels, just right behind him. But head to head, I'm going Drake May.
Awesome stuff. Let's take our first break and we'll get into the greatest tight end class ever.
This is European soccer's biggest stage.
Written in the stars! What a difference she has made!
The question is, can you handle it?
Can you handle it?
The crowd here feels electric. Stream every match of the UEFA Women's Champions League on Paramount+.
Okay, I should have asked this before. I already said it twice on air and thousands of people heard it, Theo, but is that too much hyperbole to say this is the greatest tight end class ever?
Why not? Why not? At this point, why not? I mean, guys are hitting right and left, and the highest drafted tight end in the class has done next to nothing. Back-to-back weeks of 3 catches for Colston Loveland, and we're still talking about this being the greatest tight end class ever. I'm sort of right there, Heath. And I saw in your you always send a very good show sheet. Big shout out to Heath.
Even if I send it to the wrong email.
Very organized guy. Well, I switch companies on you. What am I going to do? So when it comes down to it, when we're looking at the sheer number of players that we need to have highly ranked among tight ends, we're right there. And Tyler Warren has been exactly what we wanted him to be, and then some. He's very, very similar to Brock Bowers. In terms of touch competition, there's certainly a lot more of it in Indianapolis, but the things he's able to do, the stylistically, how he's able to play, Tyler Warren is the real deal. Tyler Warren, I think, needs to be considered a top 4 asset at the tight end position. Bowers, McBride, I'll throw Tucker Kraft up there, and then Tyler Warren's right there. And then Heath, the 2 guys that have just been like absolutely perfect for fantasy football. Harold Fannin, who we talked about early when we podcasted together a few weeks ago, we were very head over heels over Harold Fannin. Harold Fannin looks like the kind of guy with a profile where, not to be hyperbolic, but would you be shocked in the next 4 years if he gives you a tight end 1 overall season? Because I don't think I would at this point. He's 21 years old. He's one of the youngest tight ends in the NFL this year, and he's been fast-tracked, and he's one of the highest targeted tight ends in the NFL, despite David Njoku being also a top 10 targeted tight end. Fannin's awesome. And then Aronde Gadsden has been just a rocket ship to the moon. Looks like the second coming of Darren Waller. And I've gotten all kinds of hyperbolic about Aronde Gadsden. A couple of weeks ago with Scott Barrett, I said Oronde Gadsden needs to be considered a top 12 dynasty tight end. And I said he will be drafted as a top 12 tight end in redraft next year. And at the time, people are like, slow your roll a little bit, Theo. And now it's like, yeah, is he going to be drafted as a top 5 tight end next year in redraft? Is he going to be drafted is he considered also a top 5 tight end in dynasty? Oronde Gadsden, like when we look at that profile, Heath, where it's the sort of wide receiver tight end hybrid, where some people had him coming into the NFL draft. And then we look at how he's been able to produce as a day 3 selection. We start looking at guys who are unicorns, who just dominated fantasy football. I mean, I'll throw out names like Puka Nacua, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then George Kittle in year 2, where Oronde Gadsden might be on that sort of trajectory. Brett Whitefield, who's a tremendous evaluator of college talent at Fantasy Points. The two of us do a lot of podcasts together, and we're constantly talking about the rookie classes. He thinks that he's the next Mark Andrews. I've said that I think he's the next Darren Waller, sort of peak Darren Waller. And Darren Waller and Gadsden have a lot of similarities. When Darren Waller came out of Georgia Tech, it was a wide receiver in a triple option scheme under Paul Johnson. And Waller ended up having some off the field concerns, and then, of course, peaked a little bit later under Gruden as a Raider. But Waller and Gadsden are very, very similar. You also have with Gadsden, he's playing under Greg Roman, who was the offensive coordinator for peak Mark Andrews, and he's playing under Jim Harbaugh, who was the head coach for peak Vernon Davis. So we've seen elite tight end production under the head coach and the offensive coordinator, and his quarterback is elite in Justin Herbert and absolutely loves him. So with those two guys and Warren, anything we get on top of that is just icing on the cake. Mason Taylor has also been flashed, a lot of productivity in sort of a moribund offense, but Mason Taylor looks like a player that's going to be a long-time tight end 1 in Dynasty. Not sure if Mason Taylor has the same upside as a Fannin or Gadsden, but he's still a player that you're very, very happy to have on your Dynasty roster. And then, like we said, Colston Loveland's been a disappointment, but he's still incredibly young. He's got a lot of room to fail as a top 10 overall, as a top 10 pick. I think that he might be a player that we're really betting on to have a year 2 breakout. I mean, I could be wrong on this one. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in Loveland over the second half of the year. And certainly I probably overrated him as a dynasty asset to start out the season. And then the player that I'm interested in seeing over the second half of the year coming off of his bye week is Terrence Ferguson, who we know Sean McVay likes a lot. We know has elite athleticism at the position. So yeah, I think when we're talking about this class collectively, when we get to the end of the season, every single player we named has an opportunity to be a top 12 tight end in Dynasty, including Ferguson. So I think I'm there with you, Heath. This class, we built it up during the draft process, and I think it's doing exactly what we wanted and more.
Much more. Yeah.
Gadsden's the key, though. Gadsden's the one that maybe we underrated. I know there was a Gadsden hive out there, but for him to fall to day 3 and then put up a level of production, it's incredibly impressive.
Well, just to look at, and my good friends over at Dynasty League Football, I use their resources all the time. And I love that you can go back and look at ADP from prior months. And so if you look at the tight end Dynasty ADP over at DLF in August, so before the seasons, before anybody played any football, Tyler Warren was already tight end 4. He's currently my tight end 3. That one looked pretty sharp. Colston Loveland was tight end 6. I think for a lot of people, I think in ADP now, he's dropped down to tight end 9. I still have him at tight end 7. We can get into that in just a second. Behind him, there's not another rookie tight end until you get to Mason Taylor at tight end 15. I think he's tight end 12 now, which is where he is for me. So again, pretty good. Harold Fannin was tight end 21. We had him top 12 pretty much from the moment he was drafted. And Oronde Gadsden was tight end 30. Now, interestingly, in October, Gadsden was still tight end 30. He's going to definitely be the biggest riser in November ADP over there. But a quick game here of too high, too low, just right. I'll just tell you the tight end and the ranking, and you just say too high, too low, just right. And if I guess for the purposes of this, high means like if I have them 3 and you think they're 6, I have them too high. Tyler Warren at 3.
Just right.
Harold Fannin at 6.
Just right.
Colston Loveland at 7.
Too high.
Okay. Oronde Gadsden at 8.
Too low.
Mason Taylor at 10.
About right.
And then 3 other guys in my top 24. So I've got Elijah Arroyo still at 16. I've really liked when we've got to see him with the ball. It hasn't been as often as we expected because AJ Barner has also been very good when he's been given the opportunity. Arroyo currently 18 in consensus ADP, it looks like.
And I was extremely, extremely high on Arroyo as well. I think 18's about right because athletically he's extremely gifted. We also have a lot of confidence in Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator. We have a lot of confidence in Darnold, who's been better than I think a lot of us anticipated in Seattle, Heath. The problem is you named A.J. Barner, and A.J. Barner is a year 2 player. They like targeting A.J. Barner in the red zone, and they're playing 2 tight ends. So Arroyo, I think 18's about as high as you want to have him right now, mid tight end 2. If there was no A.J. Barner, it would be wheels up for Arroyo. But the problem is I don't see any reason why the 2026 trajectory should change. Maybe they go 12 full time and they use Arroyo in like a fun move tight end and his role moves up. But the presence of Barner is extremely, extremely annoying.
Yes. Well, and a similar situation. My number 22 tight end, Gunnar Helm, who has shown some very good things, scored a touchdown on National Tight End Day. He is currently tight end 36 by ADP. He's 22 for me. Too high, too low, just right.
I think it's about right. And I think you might actually, like we talked about, Kamara's probably not going to get moved. I think Tennessee's a team that wants to move a lot of assets.
Yes.
And Chigakonkwo has been a player that's continually been mentioned. And I think there will be a market for Okonkwo. A lot of teams value having 2 tight ends. They love being able to get in 12 personnel. And Okonkwo has been an efficient enough receiver during his NFL career that I think there's probably a larger market than maybe a lot of fantasy managers might anticipate. If that happens, Helm, I think, could be a fun one over the second half of the year. And getting back to Helm was very, very productive at Texas. A lot of people very, very high on him heading into the NFL Combine. And of course, he had, shout out to Gunnar Helm's agent, probably cost him a lot of money allowing him to run the 40 that day. He had the catastrophic 40 time, but he was running the 40 while banged up. If he would have simply not run the 40, I think he would have been drafted maybe in round 4, round 5. So Tennessee maybe stole one when it came to Gunnar Helm. If you look at the target competition he had at Texas, with Isaiah Bond, with Matthew Golden, and the numbers he was still able to put up, and Jaden Blue for that matter, the numbers he was able to put up, Gunnar Helm was a better sort of prospect than you usually see in this sort of situation. So I think you being bullish on Helm, he's in my waiver wire article this week, as a potential ad for FFPC managers. Tight end premium managers should definitely be trying to get a little Helm before a potential Okonkwo trade. I like that one, Heath.
And then you said Ferguson already. He's my tight end 23. ADP has him at 28. So we are ahead of consensus on that as well. I want to circle back around to Loveland because we talked about it. It used to be conventional wisdom that if there's an elite tight end who's not very good as a rookie, we don't downgrade him. We're not surprised when rookies aren't good at tight end position. Well, that's obviously been thrown out the window. Rookie tight ends are blowing up all around Colston Loveland. It happened last year. It's happened quite a bit in recent memory. So I know Jacob Gibbs is kind of taking the same path with Loveland that I am with Luther Burden. Just like the breakout's coming, the breakout's coming, the breakout's coming. And we're really seeing very little evidence in what Chicago and Ben Johnson are doing that suggests that, but that's what rookies do. They have second half breakouts in their rookie years. If you really believe in a guy, but you did say 7's too high. So where's the right spot for a guy that was drafted top 10, does nothing basically the first half of his rookie year, and is very, very young, as you mentioned earlier?
I think the tight end 10 to 12 range is probably a little bit more where I'd be a little more comfortable having him. The problem with Loveland, you just named Luther Burden. Luther Burden and Rome Odunze are there. Odunze will be heading into year 3 next year. Burden will be heading into year 2. And I don't think Ben Johnson's necessarily done. If they do move on from DJ Moore, I would anticipate you're going to see Ben Johnson and the Chicago Brass sort of trying to add more and more skill position players. One of the best indicators of tight ends having immense fantasy football success is being the number 1 or number 2 targets on their team.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to Loveland next year, we'd sort of be betting on him being the number 3 target on the team. And that would be a step forward versus what we saw to start this year, where, Cole Kmet's presence, Olamide Zacchaeus, guys we didn't even anticipate giving Loveland any sort of problems in terms of target competition have both been there. Now, Loveland back-to-back weeks where he's had 3 catches in each game. It's a positive step in the right direction. And certainly this is a franchise that loves him. They took him ahead of Tyler Warren. I wonder if they could have a do-over there, Heath. I think there'll be a lot of people in the building and a lot of Bears fans who might like to trade him straight up for Tyler Warren. They could have done that. The one thing with Loveland is the college, he dominated in terms of the metrics where he put up the most receiving yards, the most catches at Michigan. He had the most targets, but it was a very low-volume pass attack. The year before when they won the national title, as a younger player, he nearly had the most receptions on the team, finishing second to Roman Wilson. So there was some metrics sort of surrounding Loveland where we said, the production was not elite, but this is a guy that's a tremendous route runner. This is a guy with elite athleticism. We're going to sort of paint a picture where those numbers are all going to take a huge step forward in the NFL. I wonder if this year's draft class, though, Heath, is going to change the way teams sort of approach the position a little bit, because the 2 players that we're talking about that are meteoric risers for you in your rankings, Harold Fannin Jr., drafted in round 3, Aronde Gadsden, drafted in round 5. And these 2 were both elite college producers putting up tremendous numbers. I just think that there's going to be a little bit more emphasis put into finding these guys who carved out massive roles, massive college producers at the tight end position, just based on how quick these guys are able to affect an NFL game and help their teams win in the passing game. So with Loveland, I do think there's a little bit more of a developmental to him. We also don't like with Loveland that he missed time in the preseason with injuries. I think that sort of held back his development. I have a ton of Colston Loveland. I hope you're correct, and I hope he's a little closer to being like the tight end 7. But I think for me in my rankings over at Fantasy Points, I'm going to end up having him a little bit closer to the low-end tight end 1 range.
I think there's probably a lot of Loveland managers, like you said, Bears fans would trade Loveland for Warren right now. I think there's a lot of fantasy managers that are just thinking about that alternate reality where Loveland was drafted by the Colts or Loveland was drafted by the Browns. And would he have done what those guys have done? Or is this more, I think the thing, and we talked about it a lot for redraft purposes, and it's one of the reasons I didn't draft him very much in redraft, is I really hate it when rookies miss as much time as he missed in the summer. And Luther Burden missed quite a bit of time as well. And we've seen it in the slow starts. I'll just say, I'm not ready to write either of these guys off from having a big breakout. Kind of Olamide Zacchaeus, please go away.
Yeah,
having a big breakout in the second half of the season, but it's more wish casting maybe than anything else. Let's take our second break. When we come back, I've got a few buys that I want to talk to Theo about because I'm definitely higher than consensus on these guys, and one of them has been the highest scorer in fantasy football this year. We'll be right back.
You can't count on accurate expiration dates.
That is a rookie mistake.
Or the kindness of strangers. But thanks to CBS Sports, you can always count on Sundays with the NFL on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Okay, so I've got 3 buys here, mostly entirely maybe for contenders, at least the first 2. But Patrick Mahomes. When we were talking about the number 1 quarterback in Dynasty, you talked about how Drake May is moving into that conversation, but obviously it's Lamar Jackson still up there. Josh Allen's still up there. Jaden Daniels is in the group behind them. And I think that's the way most people still view it. Patrick Mahomes coming into this year was almost kind of in that third tier for a lot of people. Like it was Lamar and Allen and maybe Daniels at the top, and it was Burrow and Hurts next. And then, yeah, if it's Mahomes, we got to leave him up there because he was so good a few years ago. He's back. Rashee Rice is healthy. Xavier Worthy's there. Marquise Brown and Juju would have been his number 1 and number 2 wide receivers most of the last 2 seasons. Mahomes, since Worthy came back in week 4, his 17-game pace, 4,800 yards passing, 47 passing touchdowns. Oh, yeah, and 500 yards rushing and 7 rushing touchdowns. If I'm a contender, I would trade just about anybody to get Patrick Mahomes. I think he's the number 1 quarterback rest of the season, and I don't think Rice or Worthy are going anywhere. And one more thing, like Andy Reid is now going for it on 4th downs. The Chiefs have decided they're not going to be the most cowardly great offense ever, and so they keep drives going and they score touchdowns instead of field goals. Obviously, I've got Patrick Mahomes paraphernalia behind me, Theo. Cool my jets a little bit on buying Patrick Mahomes.
No, I don't want to at all. I think Patrick Mahomes, this is the revenge tour. The Super Bowl loss, it was an ugly one, and it's been nothing but wheels up. Mahomes has finished as a top 6 weekly scorer at the position in 7 out of 8 games played. He's the number 1 quarterback on the year in fantasy scoring. And like you said, it's been Rashee Rice for 2 games here. Last night was a great example of this, Heath, of just how good this offense is. Ugly first half, and then the second half comes around, and you have these 3 methodical, long scoring drives where they're going the length of the field. Mahomes looks completely locked in right now. I mean, we should have never made any sort of adjustments for the greatest player of all time. Again, that's a little hyperbolic, but one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in terms of Patrick Mahomes. Right now, points per game wise, like you said, the guy is simply rolling. It's the best points per game season, one of the best ones of his career. He's right in line with 2022, right in line with 2020, and slightly behind the 2018 pace. And 2018, of course, was the 50 touchdown pass season. And like you said, he's right there in terms of he's going to potentially challenge that number over the second half of the year. So I'm completely with you, Heath. It's also a running game where they don't have a bell cow running back who's commanding touches. They're sort of in this committee backfield where they're giving touches to Pacheco. Kareem Hunt had 2 touchdowns last night, and then Brashard Smith in certain games is going to get his touches as well. So I'm completely with you. I made this call a couple weeks back on the podcast with Scott Barrett that I think Patrick Mahomes is this year's QB1 overall. And a lot of people try to find reasons to kind of doubt this. But I think now with 8-game sample size, there's really no reason for this one. I mean, the Detroit game, the Baltimore game, he was facing these sort of decimated defenses. But the last 2 weeks, it's just been completely lights out football. The one thing that you mentioned, though, that I do think is not going to necessarily be as productive is the rushing production, just because I feel like that was a early season rushing production for Mahomes was because the offense needed him to do it. I think he's going to be selective with when he decides to run the ball a little bit in the second half of the year. They're right back to being a big Super Bowl contender. And Heath, the game that I've had circled for a long time here is the Indianapolis versus Kansas City game. That game is going to be an unbelievable one for us as fantasy fans, as NFL fans. We're also sort of rooting for Indianapolis to win these next 2 games. So we get Indianapolis facing off against Kansas City. I mean, that game could be potentially incredible, and it might be a sneak preview for an AFC Championship game.
I think a lot of people expected this week against the Bills to be the sneak preview of the AFC Championship game. The Chiefs, no weeks off for this team. A very, very difficult schedule. Yeah, I think that the running thing, you are probably right. He does have 28 to 32 yards rushing in each of his last 3 games, but just 4 attempts in the last 2 games. I think against a team like Buffalo, we'll probably see him run a little bit. When you get up against the Colts, you probably see him run a little bit. Against the Raiders, probably not. Probably don't need to use Patrick Mahomes' legs in that game. So that was obviously like, yeah, Heath, go buy the guy who's scoring more fantasy points than anyone else. Thank you. Trey Benson is my second buy. We've talked about Trey Benson quite a bit on the show in the past. I think we were both pretty big fans of his. The injury timing could not have been worse. James Conner goes out for the year just the week after Trey Benson gets hurt. He is eligible to come off of injured reserve in week 10. My expectation when he's back and fully healthy, it may not happen his first game back, is that he's going to be the bell cow in this offense. This Bam Knight, Amari DiMercado, like they'll have a third down back, but he's going to handle the vast majority of the running back touches. And I expect he's going to play well enough that he has that role starting week 1 of next year as well. We'll see if James Conner is able to come back, but at his age, I wouldn't expect much. Are you in with me on Trey Benson?
Yeah, absolutely. And I talked about this with Brett Whitefield actually last week. He was my guest on Dynasty Life, and we talked about players who could make an impact. You know, whether you're a redraft manager, whether you're a dynasty manager, I think trading for Trey Benson makes some sense. And you can point towards the success of Bam Knight, the success of Michael Carter, even in a short sample size, those two guys being able to provide utility to fantasy managers. Benson, we had so much enthusiasm for when James Conner went down with the season-ending injury, and it was sort of like the thesis with Trey Benson. We've seen it with those two guys who are sort of journeyman running backs the last couple of weeks. So I do agree with you. When Benson is ready to take on a full workload, he's going to get all that he can handle. It's been an offense that's been very efficient at producing running back fantasy points. And what's great about Benson is he's going to be trending up right towards the end of the fantasy football regular season and into the fantasy playoffs. So I don't see any reason he can't give you top 15 weekly running back fantasy scoring, Heath. I think he's a really, really fun trade candidate. And the fact that he's a year 2 player gives you a little bit more long-term viability than maybe some of these guys where we get down to the trade deadline and a lot of managers will say, I'm going to go send out trade offers. I'm going to go get a Derrick Henry. I'm going to go get this older guy who's going to help me out. And that's great. But when you can get a player that can help you out in the short term, but doesn't crush you in the long term, I think that's a great way of playing Dynasty.
So I think, let's go back to where we kind of started off the show, because Cam Skattebo, somebody who's not going to help you at all this year, the same age as Trey Benson, both could be starting running backs next year. Skattebo definitely gained more popularity and had that hot streak that Benson hasn't really had yet. If you're a contender, would you take Benson for Skattebo?
If I'm a contender, I think I'm trying to squeeze out a little bit more. But I do think that a lot of these trades don't have to necessarily be 1-for-1
right.
for Skattebo. I think that there's going to be managers who would be willing to, in a super flex format, trade me a Trey Benson and a pick, trade me a Rico Dowdle and a second. Like, there's going to be scenarios where I get utility for the short term and a pick on top of it, just because of Cam Skattebo. It's the reality doesn't necessarily always set in for fantasy managers holding injured assets too, Heath, where a lot of times you're able to sort of the fantasy managers who are attempting to trade for injured assets, the reality doesn't necessarily set in for a while. So it's still the freshness of Cam Skattebo having massive performances a few weeks back. I think you're going to be able to squeeze out a little bit more than just like a Trey Benson.
Okay. My last one is probably the most controversial, and I expect if there's anybody here in the chat who watches the main show, they're going to get mad because they're tired of hearing about how Brian Thomas Jr. is still a good football player. I refuse to believe that Brian Thomas Jr. forgot how to catch a football. Drops are generally not predictive. He already has 9 of them on 55 targets this year. There's been some things that aren't going right in Jacksonville. Obviously, there's connection issues between he and Trevor Lawrence. There may be some implementing of the offense challenges that we didn't anticipate early in the year there, but he's still a 23-year-old wide receiver who had a remarkable rookie season, who's still getting 8 targets per game. I am buying Brian Thomas and still treating him as a number 1 wide receiver in Dynasty. Everybody thinks I'm insane, Theo. Am I insane?
I think if you just take a bird's eye view and look at what he was able to accomplish last year, 87 catches, 1,282 receiving yards, and 10 receiving touchdowns. And he was a league winner down the stretch. If you had him on your Dynasty roster, a lot of players who had him were able to win their fantasy football playoffs because he had a 30-pointer in week 15, a 28-pointer in week 16, and a 25-pointer in week 17. I mean, he was unbelievable in the second half of the year. I think that he's playing hurt this year, Heath, and I think that that's been bad for him. I also think that the offense is not fully clicked with Brian Thomas. He looks way more tentative, but I think when we are trying to acquire players like this, we need to take an optimistic approach. And you're able to acquire Brian Thomas right now for 80 cents on the dollar for a lot of Brian Thomas managers. You're not paying that premium that you would have in August. The rookie season still exists. And for a player to have that sort of rookie season and be a first-round pick, it's a pretty Teflon asset. I think players are very frustrated with Brian Thomas right now with the scoring numbers he's given us this year. But I agree with you. I think if you have an opportunity to add him to your dynasty roster a year from now, 2 years from now, I think you're going to be very, very happy that you did.
100%. Thank you, Theo. You didn't make me feel like I was insane. Couple of quick questions from the chat before we get out of here. And I think this is Sal says, I'm the defending champ. Got a lineup of Herbert, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs. Yeah, you're the defending champ. Justin Jefferson, Puka Nacua, George Kittle, Jamar Chase, and he says Nico Collins too. But I went all in the last few years and I don't have many picks. Should I trade Justin Jefferson for picks and players? This is where I think like people who hate rebuilding, I think about this more than I do. But if I won the title last year and I've got this lineup right here, Theo, I'm not trading anyone. I'm going back to back. And then I'm going to try to go back to back to back. And we'll deal with the rebuild when that gets here. But do you on a team like this, and Jefferson's not anywhere close to old, but there are wide receivers like a Brian Thomas Jr. and many others that are, 2 or 3 years younger than he is. Do you try to get younger in the middle of a championship window?
I think that there's an argument to be said for trying to have a kind of perpetual long-term championship window. There's a sort of a theory in Dynasty that the old school thinking that I'm just this crazy rebuild, that I'm this all the way in, I'm trading all my picks, I'm trading all my older assets, and all my younger assets and just going for it. Having a little bit of neutrality, a little bit of flexibility, and then just kind of getting into the playoffs and letting variance, there's also the fact that there's variance in fantasy football where if you push the chips in way too much, Heath, you maybe cost yourself a chance at a title because of variance, and then you mess yourself up for seasons to come. And on the flip side, you might trade guys too low. You might make mistakes when it's a full-on rebuild. I kind of agree with you. And I think when Justin Jefferson, it's such a Teflon asset where you could take on Jefferson if you're a rebuilding manager. You could take him if you're a championship contender. He wouldn't be the one that I would attempt to trade away. I think, Sal, if you want to trade away a player where maybe the dynasty marketplace has pushed him up to a place where maybe he shouldn't be, it's Nico Collins, where it was back-to-back seasons of 17 points per game. And then this year, we've seen those numbers pull back a little bit. We don't necessarily have any sort of confidence in Nick Caley, the offensive coordinator there. CJ Stroud played well this week, but Stroud's sort of been a mixed bag this year. I think if I'm going to trade a player and look to sort of pivot off of him based on your roster, Heath already talked about how Kittle's lost value. Chase Brown certainly lost a lot of value, but Nico Collins is still a premium value to many dynasty managers, and you might be able to squeeze out a trade where it ends up coming out on top. Sort of a Nico Collins for a Jordan Addison type player plus. I think that still exists for a lot of fantasy managers. I might be able to get a younger wide receiver and some picks for Nico Collins, and then kind of keep my championship window open and then have more picks down the line.
I was thinking you might go get a really good pick and Travis Hunter.
Yes,
if Travis Hunter's usage in week 7 validates, then Travis Hunter might be better than Nico Collins. I skipped over your buys, Theo. I gave my buys. I didn't get your buys. You brought a couple. I think you have one for a contender and one for a rebuilder, maybe.
Yeah. So my rebuilding contender, you talked about him earlier in the show. I don't think the market is quite where it should be on Harold Fannin Jr. I think Harold Fannin managers understand what they have. but I still think that there's an opportunity for you to buy him for less than you would pay for like a Tyler Warren, because the draft capital is still there, because we have a lack of clarity at the quarterback position in Cleveland. I think as a long-term asset, Harold Fant is just a set it and forget it high-end fantasy asset at the tight end position that is going to challenge for tight end 1 overall seasons at some point in his career. Really, really think highly of Harold Fant. And then from a contending perspective, I like the idea of trading for Kamani Vidal, because we don't know we have a little bit of a lack of clarity with when Omarion Hampton is going to return from injury. I think with Kamani Vidal, I'm not going to have to pay the premium that I would for a guy like a Trey Benson, even a guy like a Tyrone Tracy. I still think there's Kamani Vidal managers who are looking to sort of cash out this week. Yes. But we've seen Kamani Vidal have very strong performances, and the role has been really strong as well. I think Kamani Vidal is the kind of player that you might Billy Bean your way to 2 or 3 wins. And if we see Omarion Hampton fail to, really get going towards the tail end of the season, or he gets injured once again, which can sort of happen when you come off of the IR, then I think Kamani Vidal might have a utility for us in the fantasy playoffs. I also think Rico Dowdle, this is the week. He's a sort of a buy high right now, Heath, but I think he could end up giving us really, really high-end scoring numbers if we do see this usage switch where you see him in more of a 65-35 role with Chuba Hubbard taking a back seat. And then the one fantasy mercenary to go out and trade for if you're a contender, it's Davante Adams. And we saw it heading into the game in Europe where he had the 3 touchdown grabs. But this Rams offense coming out of the bye week with Davante Adams, hopefully a healthy Puka Nacua, I think this team could be really, really good over the second half of the year. And with Davante Adams, if the fantasy manager that has him on their roster, on their dynasty team, is not a team that's like 5-3, 6-2, there's something in the back of their mind saying, I need to sell Davante Adams. Look at how old he is. But Heath, I think Davante Adams could give us wide receiver 1 numbers rest of the way.
Well, to that point, I think Matthew Stafford in Superflex leagues, if he's on a team that's not at the very top of the standings, their team must be pretty bad because he's been awesome. And he could definitely help push some teams later in the season. Alyssa has a 7-1 team, and she got offered CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott for Neighbors, Scattaboo, and a second.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess she has to give up the second. She has to give up Neighbors. She has to give up Scattaboo. She gets Lamb. She gets Dak. It is Superflex.
I'm making this trade. I think this is a great trade, and I think that right now I have CeeDee Lamb ahead of Malik Neighbors in my dynasty wide receiver rankings. Yep. I'm a little more punitive when guys get injured for the season than some of my colleagues at Fantasy Points, where a couple of people still have Neighbors ahead. But I have Lamb ahead of Malik Neighbors. I also think if we're looking at it from a redraft lens, he's going to get drafted ahead of Neighbors next year as well, Heath, because Neighbors most likely is going to start the year out on the pup. Yep. Scattaboo, we talked about the risks and the dangers with him. You're getting Dak Prescott, who's lights out right now, giving you weekly QB1 numbers on an offense that can't stop anybody. And I'm getting this correlation play, this stack with Lamb and Dak. And your second is going to be like the 211, 210.
Well, she's giving him his second back. So she has his second.
Oh, she has his second.
So it's going to be an earlier second. But I think still, if you told me, I agree with you about Lamb over Neighbors right now. And if you told me that I had to give up Scattaboo and 201 for Dak as a contender, I'm doing that.
All day long. Yeah, I'm making this trade all day long. I think it's a huge win for you, Alyssa.
Great job there. Great job, Theo. Tell everybody one more time where they can find you.
Yeah, so Dynasty listeners, you've heard Heath on my show, Dynasty Life. You can find that anywhere you get your podcast. You can also find that over at Fantasy Points YouTube. School of Scott, I record with Scott Barrett once a week. You can find that again anywhere you get your pods and over at Fantasy Points YouTube. And the show that I'm dropping multiple episodes a week of is Fantasy Football Daily. That show, we're dropping 4 shows a week. Waivers, Start Sit. I do the waiver show with Joe Dolan and Tom Brawley. I do the Start Sit with Graham Barfield. I have a guest show, and then I have a solo show that drops every Monday morning, sort of recapping the week. All of my written content, all of my Dynasty rankings over at Fantasy Points. I write the Dynasty Market Report, and then I also do a deeper league / high stakes leagues waiver wire report that drops over at Fantasy Points as well. I'm a busy guy this time of year, just like you, Heath. We're grinding, man.
Awesome stuff, Theo. Thank you to Nada for making everything work. Thank you to everybody who was active in the chat and putting Harold Fannon's name in there. It makes me smile every time. We will talk to you next Tuesday.